Welcome to class 2. I'm happy to see everybody with the faces that I can see. If you're comfortable doing so, please take off the stop video so I can see the faces. Great. Thanks, Peter. Good morning. And so I just wanted to say, first of all, this is the second in our series, and I wanted to thank those of you who reached out to me and said that studying Psalms made you look at the Psalms differently during services, which is exactly the idea that I would want. Somebody's not muted. Okay. So again, I want to dedicate today's learning in memory of our dear friend Joan Hulkauer. We dedicated our learning last week to Joan, and we will all 4 sessions will be dedicated to Joan's memory. Joan was at every class, everything that she could come to, anytime she could learn. And this week we're studying about Proverbs, which is all about wisdom. And anytime Joan could learn something, she was there. She was participating in the class. She always volunteered to read. So we really feel her absence. So Joan, Hannah, Ruth, we are dedicating our learning to you today. So if everyone could just unmute for a minute so we could say the bracha together, that would be great. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with commandments and given us the mitzvah to study and engage with your Torah. So the arc of the class is that I'm just going to review just very briefly what wisdom literature is, because the book of Proverbs is part of that. Then we'll talk about the book of Proverbs. Then we'll talk about the role of women in the book of Proverbs. And then we'll look specifically at chapter 1 and chapter 31, the first and the last chapter. Chapter 31 is the Eshet Chayil. I would love to be able to have a chance to look at chapters 7 and 8. I'm going to leave that for after if we do, because those are very interesting chapters, where chapter 7, well, we'll talk about that after. For those of you who were with us last week, I'll do a quick view of what wisdom literature is, just to situate the book of Proverbs in wisdom literature. And for those of you who couldn't join us last week, this will give you a brief synopsis of what wisdom literature is. So the Tanakh is made up of 3 parts. We've got the Torah, which has the 5 books of Moses that we read in shul every week: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the Nevi'im part of Tanakh, the Taf, the Nun, the Chet, is the prophets, which is where we get our Haftorahs from: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 lesser prophets. And then the third part is called the Ketuvim. The Ketuvim are English, they call them the writings. That's Psalms, which we did last week, Proverbs, which we're doing this week, Job, which we're doing next week, and then the 5 Megillot, which is the Song of Songs, the book of Ruth, which we'll be doing in 2 weeks, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So that's the basic canon. And so now the wisdom literature is part of the Ketuvim, the third part, the writings. The 5 books of the Torah and the 8 books of the prophets contain what we call the Deuteronomic Code. And the lesson we're supposed to learn is that the good life is all about being obedient to God, obeying the code of law that's laid out in the Torah. And the 11 books in the Ketuvim and the writings are known as the wisdom literature, and it's more about living a good life. And if we live a good life, we'll be rewarded. That's the basic premise. So some biblical scholars are not crazy about wisdom literature because they find it too universal. It doesn't have any mention of the land of Israel. It doesn't talk about the Exodus from Egypt, which is the event that began our journey to peoplehood. It doesn't talk about Moses, and it doesn't talk about Sinai, which are all pretty basic concepts in the Torah. The Torah emphasizes the law and the covenant with God, right? The deal that God made with our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And the deal is that we will serve God by keeping his mitzvot, and in return, God will protect us as God's chosen people, watch over our descendants, right? That's us, and bring us to the promised land, the land of Israel. And these 613 mitzvot that are listed in the Torah, we're supposed to follow, and it's all very black and white. You do the mitzvahs, you do the mitzvot, you'll be rewarded, you'll have a good life, and if you don't, there are punishments which are laid out in the Torah. And to counter this black and white world, wisdom literature adds warmer hues, emotions, empathy, sympathy, and psychology. It's about personal piety, and it's not about what God wants us to do. It's about how God wants us to act, not so, and about how we're supposed to feel. So the voice and wisdom literature, the ultimate message, and how do we get to know God is by living wisely in the world that God created, and that's how we achieve a sense of personal piety. So let's take a look a bit about the actual book of Proverbs. Okay, the book of Proverbs, in Hebrew it's called Mishlei. It's a straightforward book. Its messages are accessible to everyone, and its basic premise is about wisdom. If you live by wisdom, all will go well with you. Okay, when we get to Job next week in wisdom literature, we'll see that, that's not necessarily the case, but that's next week's class. The Proverbs is said to have been written by King Solomon, but he probably wasn't the king yet when they were written. And he uses words like wisdom and ethics and statements of understanding, justice, law, uprightness. These are all traits that we're supposed to learn and internalize from Proverbs. So who's the target audience for the book of Proverbs? Really, it's everybody. And with the Psalms, which we studied last week, the goal is for each person to achieve a personal piety. And in Proverbs, the goal is to achieve wisdom, which is accessible to everyone. And if you have wisdom before you read the book, you'll get more wisdom. So just as there's no limit to how pious we can be, there's no limit to how much wisdom we can have. So let's talk for a few moments just about Solomon, who is the alleged author of Proverbs. And I say alleged because nobody really, the biblical scholars don't really know who wrote all these books. But Proverbs is attributed to Solomon. So Solomon is the wise king, right? I'm sure you must have heard the story about the two women. They go to before King Solomon. There was a baby. One woman says the baby's mine. The other woman says, no, the baby is mine. So King Solomon in his wisdom says, oh, you both think you own the baby. I have a great idea. Let's cut the baby in half. You'll get half of the baby and you'll get half of the baby. So one woman says, marvelous idea. I'll take half the baby. And the other woman says, no, no, no. Whatever you do, don't harm the baby. Give the baby to the other woman. And Solomon realized that's how he knew that the mother was the one who said, don't harm the baby. So this is one of these stories attributed to Solomon. Solomon was a king of Israel for 40 years in the 9th century BCE. And the word Proverbs in Hebrew is mishlei, and it comes from the Hebrew word mashal. Mashal means a metaphor. And these are metaphors of Solomon, metaphors basically about wisdom. According to Kings, the 5th chapter of Kings, God endowed Solomon with great wisdom. He was the wisest man ever to live. People came from all over to hear his wisdom. And it's purported that he wrote 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. And the proverbs, some of these proverbs are found in the book of Proverbs. Some of them are found in the book of Ecclesiastes. And the songs are identified as part of the Song of Songs. So to round out Solomon's introduction, which to this to the book of Mishlei, which may appear to be to some to be sort of a secular, because it talks about wisdom and it doesn't talk about Jewish values as we see them in the Torah. Solomon brings in the idea of God, and he says that the fear of God is what is really the beginning of all knowledge. According to the biblical scholar Robert Alter, the book of Proverbs is not only an anthology, but it's an anthology of anthologies. And it has 6 different parts. The first part is a general prologue, which is how to teach wisdom to others. And the book actually begins with the words Mishlei Shlomo, the Proverbs of Solomon, and that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, Yirat Hashem. And the middle 4 units represent different kinds of analogies, and the 6th unit, which we'll get to at the end, is composed of the last 2 chapters of Proverbs, chapter 30 and chapter 31. Chapter 31 is Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor, which we will get to. So a sense of the complexity of the book of Proverbs is, on the one hand, there are these easy aphorisms that you can read, and then when you read aphorism after aphorism after aphorism, it gets a little tedious to sometimes read. So it's a bit of a complex book, and there's an interesting the commentator. I'm just going to do my screen share here. The commentator, whose name is Radak. Let's see if this works. it works. Who is Rabbi David Chimchi. Radak are the first letters of the Rabbi David Kimchi. He lived in southern France. He was sort of in the family business. His father and his older brother were also biblical commentators, but he was the most famous one of his family. So this is what he has to say about the book of Proverbs. So if somebody unmute and read about what the Radak has to say about Proverbs.
All right, here I go.
Who's that?
Susan.
Hi, thank you, Susan.
Okay. When I set about my commentary on the Bible, I examined all that had been written by my predecessors and found their interpretations arranged on the various books, some quite correct and proper, each having done his best to interpret them. Regarding Proverbs, I found differing interpretations corresponding to the different exegetical opinions, each taking his own approach to the extent that the general public is perplexed regarding its correct interpretation. Some exegetes
are biblical commentators. Okay.
Some exegetes maintain that Solomon compared the Torah to a wise and virtuous woman, and idolatry to a wicked and wanton woman. Others maintain that he compared physical matter to a harlot and intellectual form to a virtuous and wise woman. The upshot is that even individual verses were misinterpreted and readers get confused because the verses are not arranged topically. It also contains many verses which begin with one subject and end with yet another.
Right. So this is Radak, who is who's a brilliant biblical commentator, and he can't figure it out, because it's sort of confusing. So before we actually jump into the first chapter, I just wanted to say that interesting that according to the Midrash in Shir HaShirim, King Solomon wrote the Song of Songs in his youth, right? It's a book of optimism, sensuality, and love. And it says that the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, he wrote at the end of his life, having pursued every pleasure and every discipline that the world could offer. So in his early years, King Solomon celebrated what is possible, and in his old age, he faced the limitations of his wisdom. There are some that say that he wrote it exactly the opposite, that Shir HaShirim was at the end of the life, and that Kohelet was at the beginning. But for the purposes of now, either way, it sort of doesn't matter, because the bottom line is that the book of Proverbs lies in between. So whichever one he wrote when he was old and young, the book of Proverbs is considered the book that Solomon wrote when he was in middle age. So he's not naive, but he's also not yet completely disillusioned. And it's a book that insists on the importance of wisdom and knowledge. It's the voice of someone who acknowledges that he is now old enough to begin to teach the next generation. And Proverbs is all about teaching. Robert Alter, who's a modern biblical scholar, said that Proverbs presents a very practical conception of wisdom, and it's also very universal in nature, which is very similar to what wisdom literature is. It doesn't represent Israelite interests in particular or Jewish interests in particular. And when you read it, it is very, it does talk about having fear of God, but when you read the book, if you have an opportunity, it's only 31 chapters, although the chapters are much longer than they are in the book of Psalms. You'll see that it's very accessible and very universal kind of ideas. The use of the word Torah actually does appear, but it's not the noun of our Torah that we know. It's Torah as a verb, which means teaching or instruction. That's the meaning of the word Torah. And it's also used in conjunction with the word musar, which means reproof or discipline. So there's no mention in the book of Proverbs of either a covenant, right, of Sinai, or of a revelation. And that's perhaps why it almost didn't make it into the Jewish canon. The book of Proverbs is a book of poetry, and some of the topics that Proverbs deals with is wisdom, discretion, repentance, balance, love, folly, good intentions, reward, positivity, friends, home, happiness, calm, sleep, justice, aging, friendship, lust, honor, honesty, fear, and of course, wisdom. So Proverbs is set up as a series of Solomon's teachings, and the first chapter is addressed to Solomon's son. Most likely this is Prince Rehoboam, who was heir to Solomon's throne. And this would make sense because King David also spent a lot of time giving advice to his son Solomon, and now Solomon is passing on advice to his son. And he's saying, if sinners entice you, don't yield. But unfortunately, in the book of Kings, Rehoboam didn't really heed his father's advice. Instead, he listened to the younger, power-hungry advisors and wound up, under his rule, there was the unbreakable rift. The 12 nations were split into the 10 nations and 2 kingdoms, one of the 10 nations and one of 2 nations. Perhaps if he had heeded his father's wisdom, things would have gone differently, but such as it is. So Proverbs is all about wisdom. Wisdom, the word that's used is chokhmah, and it's mentioned 149 times, in the Tanakh, and 39 times in the book of Mishlei. So let's jump into chapter 1. So we'll read chapter 1, and I will annotate some of it. Some of it I've highlighted. We're only going to read the English, except I just wanted you to see that it starts with the word Mishlei Shlomo, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So does somebody want to read just the English? And I may pop in and I may say something after one of the 2 of the verses. So you need to be prepared for me to just pop in and interrupt you. Someone want to read the first chapter? Thank you. Thank you.
The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment, for acquiring the discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity, for endowing the simple with shrewdness, the young with knowledge and foresight. The wise man hearing them will gain more wisdom. The discerning man will learn to be adroit. For understanding proverb and epigram, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline.
This is his key point. It's right here. He's right up front in the verse 7 of the first chapter. This is the point of gaining knowledge. Okay.
My son, heed the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the instruction of your mother.
This is where the persona of the mentor actually emerges into this book, addressing the experienced as son. So this is why they think that he wrote this for his son, the prince. And it's really one of the only times it's talk about the mother actually teaching in the entire book.
For they are a graceful wreath upon your head, a necklace about your throat. My son, if sinners entice you, do not yield.
This is the beginning of the poem of admonition that sort of continues until verse 19. So this is going to be all telling him, you better be careful. You better watch out what's going on.
If they say, come with us, let us set an ambush to shed blood. Let us lie in wait for the innocent without cause. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, whole, like those who go down into the pit. We shall obtain every precious treasure. We shall fill our homes with loot. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have a common purse. It's a famous line, throw in your lot with us.
Yeah, that's the idea is that they're all going to, read the second half of it. So, and then you'll see.
My son, do not set out with them. Keep your feet from their path.
Right. The idea, first of all, the idea of path is a prominent feature in Proverbs, the idea of being sort of like the road not taken. And the book of Proverbs also often lays out a choice, either do this or do that. I mean, clearly the author wants you to go in one direction, but it's sort of leading you, this is what's going to happen if you do the right thing, and this is what's going to happen if you're going to do the wrong
thing. For their feet run to evil, they hurry to shed blood. In the eyes of every winged creature, the outspread net means nothing, but they lie in ambush for their own blood. They lie in wait for their own lives.
Right. The idea here is, the idea that's stressed here is that there's a built-in moral compass that leads the perpetrator from crime to disaster. So in other words, if you're gonna, this is going to be totally rejected in Job next week, which we'll see. But the idea is that whatever you're going to do, whatever negative thing you're going to do, is going to have bad consequences. It's interesting because wisdom literature is really not considered black and white, but yet it is sort of black and white, which makes it more like the Torah. Okay, read 19.
Such is the fate of all who pursue unjust gain. It takes the life of its possessor.
Right.
Wisdom cries aloud on the streets, raises her voice in the square.
So Lady Wisdom here is going to be an important character in the first part of Proverbs. From here until the end of the chapter, right, there are 14 verses. It's like one continuous poem. And then then there's a switch. After this, it goes into the one. So it's sort of like at the beginning, it tells a story, and then Proverbs goes into what we call the one-liners.
At the head of the busy street she calls. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she speaks out. How long will you simple ones love simplicity? You scoffers be eager to scoff. You dullards hate knowledge.
Yeah, that's another thing. He puts down the people who he thinks are not smart. He calls them dullards, imbeciles, a lot of euphemisms for people who are not educated.
You are indifferent to my rebuke. I will now speak my mind to you and let you know my thoughts. He already started that. Right?
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. Since you refused me when I called and paid no heed when I extended my hand, you spurned all my advice and would not hear my rebuke. I will laugh at your comity and mock when terror comes upon you. When terror comes like a disaster and calamity arrives like a whirlwind, when trouble and distress come upon you, then they shall call me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me, but not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose fear of the Lord, they refused my advice and disdained all my rebukes. They shall eat the fruit of their ways and have the fill of their own counsels.
Right here we just saw, as we saw in verses 18 and 19, the idea is that they have to taste the bitter consequences of their own evil acts. I think we're up to, 32. There we go.
The tranquility of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of dullards will destroy them. But he who listens to me will dwell in safety, untroubled by the terror of misfortune.
So over and over, Proverbs presents us with the notion that there's a pragmatic payoff for following the dictates of wisdom, right? Those who do so will enjoy untroubled lives, safe from harm. So this is the crux of wisdom theology, about wisdom and piety. And it's very if-then. You do the right thing, and then you're going to understand everything. You'll live the right way. And, halavai, right? If only it were so. But that's so now we're going to look a little bit about we'll talk about women in Proverbs. So I don't know.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Why does a dullard have to be evil? Aren't some dullards righteous people?
That's I think he's all. That's a good question. I think that he would say that there's a difference between, or there should be a difference between, education and wisdom. So he's talking about people who are uneducated, people who are not going in the right path. This is a little bit the slippery slope of all of wisdom literature, because it tells you to basically be a good person. And since that's open to interpretation, he's assuming that there's one way to be a good person, and there isn't always one way. I mean, as we know, we differ with people in our families, our friends, people in our communities. So that is the slippery slope of, I think, of all wisdom literature. It says be a good person, but what does that exactly mean? And they all lay it out. The book of Psalms lays it out. The book of Proverbs lays it out, but not everybody sees it the same way.
Because in modern times, you'd say it smacks of elitism.
It does. Well, I think he's very elitist. On the one hand, he's giving off the idea that this wisdom is accessible to anybody. Anybody can have it. But in other words, anybody can have my wisdom, is what he's saying. It doesn't mean that you can have your wisdom, Letty, and somebody else can have his or her wisdom.
Right.
So that is that's a little bit where he is on this also, which is problematic, I find. And also, like I said, that's the slippery slope of wisdom literature. It doesn't tell you exactly what you have to do. It's not the laws, the 613 laws. It leaves a lot of room for you to be who you want to be, but then you have to be okay with that. And wisdom literature isn't always as okay with that as they could be. So we're going to look a little bit now about the concept of women. Rita, when you were reading, you said, you had a reaction to how Solomon was describing wisdom and comparing it to a woman who's in positive terms or in negative terms. I don't know that. Well, we'll see. I'll leave it for the end, because what I was going to talk about is in chapter 7. He talks about woman as a seductress, and in chapter 8 he writes about woman as lady wisdom, and he compares the two. So I'm going to leave that for the end, because we can read those chapters, or maybe we have time for them. I don't know. Well, I'll make that decision in a couple minutes, because I also want to get to chapter 31, which is Eshet Chayil, and there's a lot to say about that. So so we'll sort of leave that open for right now. But it's women are talked about in many different ways in this in the book of Proverbs, and he actually talks about 6 different types of women. He's got metaphors talking about 6 different types of women. Now, given that King Solomon is purported to have had 700 wives and 300 concubines, it's assumed that he knows a thing or two about women. I'm not so sure. I'm not so
I
sure.
don't think he knows anything about women.
Exactly. Anyone who's got 700 wives and 300 concubines
Keeps looking.
of different novel. Yeah. He's like, right. The person on the app, the apps, who's always looking for the perfect person. Anyway, so the point of Proverbs is to give insight and make the reader wiser. So very often young men are addressed, but women are also supposed to be able to learn from what the men say about them. So the 6 different types of women are: the first one is the brawling, contentious, and quarrelsome woman. Okay, so and Mishlei actually says, Proverbs says, it's better to live in the corner of an attic alone or in the desert than in a lovely home with this type of woman. You probably could insert man every time it says woman. I think that that would probably be appropriate, but he's only here talking about women. This woman is also, she's labeled angry and complaining in chapter 21, and as annoying as a constant dripping on a rainy day. So, he doesn't take into account that it could be that the woman has suffered emotional damage, or, the person, there's none of that. It's just that the way back to wholeness is to self-inventory, confession, repentance, forgiveness, and just, live in God's ways. And when she finds inner peace, then she learns how to be at peace with others. Like I said, you could replace the word man every time he uses the word woman here. A second type of woman is fair and lovely and beautiful. Like in chapter 11, contains the sole reference, is the only time they talk about the physical beauty of a woman. And it says that beauty is wasted on the woman if she doesn't have discretion. It's like placing a jewel of gold in a swine's snout. So Solomon is insisting that good judgment in a woman is more desirable than physical beauty. Okay, I know that he's saying that. I'd love to know of these 700 women, how many would be considered attractive and how many weren't attractive. It would be interesting to know. The third type of woman is the gracious woman. She has chen, she has sweetness. Chen is the root word translated as favored or pleasant or precious. That's the word chana, which interestingly enough was our dear friend Joan's Hebrew name was Chana, and she had chen, she had graciousness. So the woman with the chen is known for developing in maintaining her honor and her dignity and her reputation, and with the same passion that wealthy men build and maintain their riches. She's the composite of she's considered the beautiful woman, is the woman who has chen. The fourth kind of woman is called either strange, immoral, or promiscuous, and she's the personification of folly, and described with words like simple, brash, clamorous, and ignorant. Whorish, a harlot, adulteress, a prostitute who'll bring a man to poverty, and whose sexual rendezvous with a married man can cost him his life. That's in chapter 6. So men are advised that they're supposed to steer clear of this kind of woman. And that in one verse, she's actually described as she's capable of eating a man, wiping her mouth, and then asking, "What's wrong with that?" That's in verse 30. So men are warned to avoid her, but women are actually told to befriend her, advise her, empower her, sort of get her to change her ways. The fifth type of woman is considered virtuous, excellent, and worthy. That's the woman who comes up in Eshet Chayil. She's the crown to her husband. And she's
excuse me, could I just ask a question?
Of course.
So did you say that the other women are advised to befriend her and try to change her?
Advise her, empower her.
Right. Well, didn't we just hear this whole thing to sons to stay away from bad companions?
Exactly.
Don't follow them.
Right. So that's it. In chapter 11, men are told to avoid her, keep away from this woman. But other women are said, you know what? See if you can get close to her, reach her, see her, understand where she's coming from, and change her. That's exactly what he's saying. Does that answer your question, Barbara? You're not happy with the answer, but that's what he wrote. So the virtuous woman, it says many women are virtuous and capable, but you surpass them all. That's also from the Eshet Chayil. She is presented as the role model for the other God-fearing women. She's exemplary in her social and her economic skills. And the sixth type of woman is the wise woman. She is the personification of wisdom, and she's the woman who builds and manages her home and her family, as opposed to the foolish woman who self-destructs with extravagance and idleness. And throughout the book of Proverbs, wisdom is recommended as the ideal companion, right? Joyful is the person who finds wisdom. It's in chapter 3. And women who share their wisdom deserve much appreciation. So, okay, here's where I have to figure out if we should go straight to Eshet Chayil. Well, what do you would you like? Well, let me put it out there. We can go talk about Eshet Chayil, which is the last chapter, or we can, and then if we have time, we'll talk about chapters 7 and 8. And like I said, 7 and 8 basically talks about the woman as a seductress and the woman as Lady Wisdom. So is there a strong preference either way? No. Okay. So let's go. Someone has a preference. I see mostly heads shaking. No. So let's go to the Eshet Chayil, and then we'll see if we have,
I was muted. I want to say that I preferred the other. I hate Eshet Chayil.
Okay, so sometimes when you hate something, that's the reason to study it.
I do too.
I agree with Sandy.
So, well, okay. I also don't like women being referred to as a seductress. So, all right. So, you know what? Let's try to squeeze it all in. Let's go to Eshet Chayil, and then we'll come back and do 7, 8. Okay, how's that? So let me do my screen share. Source sheet, screen share. Okay, I just have to get to the right. Where is Eshet Chayil? Should be after this. Eshet Chayil. Okay. So we'll read it in a second, but just a little bit of background first. So chapter 31, the first 9 verses are just well, we'll get to that after, because that is sort of like the prologue. So the last verse 10 through 31 is a Hebrew acrostic. There's 1 verse for each of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and it lists the qualities of the ideal Jewish woman. And it's traditionally read before Kiddush, blessing the wine, as families welcome Shabbat on Friday evening. It's a custom that was believed to have originated with the mystics in Sfat, who connected to Shabbat to the Shekhinah, the feminine manifestation of God. And in the most traditional iteration, Eshet Chayil is said by the husband to the wife on Shabbat just before Kiddush, as we mentioned. And there are many families for whom this resonates, and there are many for a variety of reasons it doesn't resonate. So the acrostic represents insights into Jewish culture, and according to one midrash, Abraham wrote this for Sarah. Okay, and according to another midrash, each verse corresponds to different of our women and female ancestors in the Bible. And as such, it represents a fairly comprehensive line of ancient Jewish history. So it represents, according to this midrash, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. One verse represents Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, one Yocheved, the mother of Moshe, Miriam, Moshe's sister, Hannah, who we read about in Rosh Hashanah, and she was barren, prayed for a child, and we model our prayers after actual praying after her. Yael, who was a warrior who killed the enemy king. Then Rachav, who saved the Israelite spies. Bathsheba, who's the mother of King Solomon, the author. Michal, the daughter of Saul, who saved David's life. And Samson's mother, Elisheva, the wife of Aaron. And the Serach bat Asher, who's the granddaughter of Jacob, who tells the Israelites where Joseph's bones are buried, and a couple of other ones. And the last one is the last verse is supposed to refer to Ruth the Moabite, who is King Solomon's great grandmother. We'll talk about that more when we study the book of Ruth in 2 weeks. So if we think about Eshet Chayil in its original context, it was composed during a time when working in the home was basically the only way that a woman could express her value. And it certainly feels limiting to us as moderns, where invisible work at home is not what we want to be praised for. But it's a snapshot of a time when that was how you could value a woman. Actually, I think probably to put it in somewhat more modern terms, you probably could say that Eshet Chayil talks about women as the original essential workers of their time. They did the stuff that were not thanked enough for, but was very important. So I found an interesting article with a feminist take on Eshet Chayil by professor, her name is Jacqueline Weintraub, and she's a professor of Hebrew Bible at Yale. And she said that Eshet Chayil means a capable wife, and that it really, as we were talking before about, someone said the word elitist, I think it was, I don't remember who said it, but someone used the word elitist, and that it's really not about every woman, because the woman in Eshet Chayil, she's risen above all the others. She's not the everyday housewife, but she's the ultimate fantasy housewife, right? The one who roasts the perfect chicken and gives the floors the sparkling sheen. And she's like one of those commercials, those commercials that used to say, what was that? I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan, never let you forget you're a man. You can just absolutely do everything. Well, perfect children, perfect home, perfect Shabbat table. So, let's take a moment now and just read the Eshet Chayil. This 1, 2, 3, 22 really represents the letters of the alphabet, not the verse in the Eshet Chayil in chapter 31. Somebody want to read Eshet Chayil? Unmute, please.
I will if nobody else.
Great.
Is.
Who's that?
Ellen.
Thanks, Ellen.
A woman of valor who can find far beyond pearls is her worth. Her husband's heart trusts in her, and he shall lack no fortune. She repays his good, but never his harm, all the days of her life. She seeks out wool and linen, and her hands work willingly. She is a merchant's ship. From afar she brings her sustenance. She rises while it is still nighttime and gives food to her household and a ration to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From the fruit of her handiwork, she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with might and strengthens her arms. She senses that her venture is good, so her lamp is not extinguished at night. She puts her hand to the distaff and her palms support the spindle. She spreads out her palm to the poor and extends her hands to the destitute. She fears not snow for her household, for the entire household is clothed with scarlet wool. Fine carpet she makes herself, linen and purple wool are her clothing. Well known at the gates is her husband as he sits with the elders of the land. Garments she makes and sells, and she delivers a belt to the peddler. Strength and splendor are her clothing, and smilingly she awaits her last day. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She anticipates the needs of her household, and the bread of idleness she does not eat. Her children rise and celebrate her, and her husband, he praises her. Many daughters have attained valor, but you have surpassed them all. False is charm and futile is beauty. A God-fearing woman, she should be praised. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is her tongue. She anticipates the needs of her household, and the bread of idleness she does not eat. Her children rise and celebrate her, and her husband, he praises her. Many daughters have attained valor, but you have surpassed them all. False is charm and futile is beauty. A God-fearing woman, she should be praised. Give her the fruits of her labor, and she will be praised at the gates by her very own deeds.
Thank you, Ellen. So the feminist critique that is often offered is that by painting a picture of the perpetually perfect housewife, and this is got its unreasonable male-centered expectations for real women, right? And Professor Weintraub writes, offending the sensibilities of post Betty Crocker and Betty Friedan world. Okay. It presents an asymmetrical division of labor here, because the woman does everything. She runs the business and she acquires the real estate, and he, the husband, he's renowned at the city gates. He sort of accumulates his social capital from all of her toil, all of her work, and all of her ingenuity. So the question is, who's the speaker and what is the context here for Eshet Chayil? It can be read as a mother advising her son on the best choice of a wife. Because in verses 1 to 9, the first 9, so these verses 10 to 31, the first 9 verses contain the voice of King Lemuel. And King Lemuel's mother. King Lemuel is also considered to be Solomon. And most of the proverbs of the father's voice in this book is giving instruction. It's always the father telling you what to do. And except that in the first chapter in verse 8, where it says, follow the teachings of your mother. So in chapter 31, Lemuel's mother's first piece of advice is who he should marry. And the chapter continues by giving the son a list of must-haves when shopping for an ideal wife. And the second to last verse makes her point. Sheker hachen vehevel hayofi. Grace is a lie and beauty is ephemeral. Looks fade. Choose a woman of substance. So another possible way of looking at is that King Lemuel, okay, that's Solomon, this is a eulogy for his mother, that his mother was wise, and only after she was gone did he really appreciate her wisdom, and so he composed this as a eulogy for his mother. Some biblical commentators say that Eshet Chayil is not about a woman at all, but rather a personification of Lady Wisdom. Okay, Rashi, who is the in the late 1100s, early 1200s, he views the entire Eshet Chayil poem as representing the Torah. And some modern biblical scholars reading Eshet Chayil within the context of the book of Proverbs also associate the woman with Lady Wisdom and see this as sort of like a counterpoint to the first chapter. The first chapters talk about Lady Wisdom being a woman, and this last chapter is sort of brackets the idea that wisdom comes from women and not only the wisdom of the fathers. So there's a nice symmetry there. So understanding Eshet Chayil is sort of about context, right? You can read it as a song of praise to women, or an homage to wisdom, or a mother's advice to a son finding a wife or a son eulogizing his mother. So I just wanted to read one more thought that a woman scholar, I have so many things that we're not going to get to here. Eshet Chayil and Me, written by Wendy Zerler, who's an associate professor of modern Jewish literature and feminist studies at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Okay, so someone who really doesn't like Eshet Chayil, does one of the women who said they really hate Eshet Chayil,
I
one
do.
of those women? Who's
I'll
that?
read it.
Letty.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. So read what Professor Zierler has to say.
As a mother, scholar, and feminist, I find myself wondering where I see myself in relation to the Eitz Chayil, this biblical Uberfrau who single-handedly feeds her entire household, works her hands in wool and flax, clothes her children in crimson, all the while managing a business and various philanthropic endeavors. To what extent do any of us see ourselves in this alpha to tub list?
Right, that's like an A to B list. Okay,
Right.
A to Z
Of
list.
what was
Sorry.
valued in a woman in the biblical period. Are we amused by it, even alienated? In the context of our own times, where so many of us work outside as well as inside the home, negotiating on a daily basis a heroic set of professional as well as domestic duties, does Proverbs 31 provide inspiration, or does it enshrine a set of unrealistic expectations? Nowadays, when husbands are more involved in child rearing, domestic chores, and Shabbat preparation, should they still sing this paean to their wives while wives sing nothing to their husbands? Given our awareness of the number of single women in our midst, as well as couples and families who do not conform to this heterosexual norm, are we not concerned about trumpeting this image as an ideal? In answering these questions, where am I?
Go ahead. And asking these questions at the
Oh,
top.
and not answering. In asking these questions, we exit the experiential mode in which the song wafts over us unthinkingly and begin a more critical set of deliberations, that discovery. What do we find when we look into the ways in which Jews read or read and understand this poem, song in the past? And what new readings can we offer as moderns and as feminists? I refer to the issue of context. We typically ignore the Eshet Chayil poem in
that the poem is preceded, right?
Right. That the Eshet Chayil poem is preceded by Proverbs 31 by 9 verses of instruction offered by an unnamed queen mother to her son King Lemuel, in which she warns her son against drunkenness and debauchery with women, encouraging him instead to judge righteously and be an advocate for the needy. One way to read Eshet Chayil, then, is as King Lemuel's eulogy for his valorous and wise mother, bearing in mind the genre of the eulogy, which often includes hyperbole and sacralization of the lost loved one.
Right. So okay, sorry.
We all know, of course, that it is best not to reserve one's appreciation for that ultimate occasion. Instead, why not sing it each week to others as well as ourselves?
So I will just add a personal thought to that, and then we can open this up and you can throw tomatoes. So that's exactly what we do in our house. At our house, we say Eshet Chayil every Friday night, but it's not something that's recited by my husband to me. It's something that everybody around the table, well, when there wasn't everybody, now it's just the two of us, but hopefully there will be more everybody sitting around our table in the not too distant future. So we have everybody say it together, because I think of Eshet Chayil really about a poem. It's a poem of gratitude. Okay. While the literal meaning is the husband is appreciating the wife, the truth is everybody sitting around the table appreciates everybody else. I appreciate my husband appreciates me. When the kids are here, we appreciate them. If we have guests, we appreciate what they bring to the table. And I don't mean physically, I mean what they bring with their presence. So for me, I see it as really appreciating everybody. It gives us a moment when everybody gets to appreciate everybody else around the table. And in that way, excuse me, we acknowledge the blessings that are around the table by saying Eshet Chayil. It's like, when I look at it, when we say it in our home, it's not that we don't think of it as the traditional. That's not the meaning that we ascribe to it. We ascribe to it a much more, more global, more universal, I guess, if you want to say. I'm happy to hear. I'm happy to open this up to anybody who wants to say something. Yes, Sandy.
That's very nice. Well, your idea is very nice, but that's not what the poem says. I mean, you're putting things in it that aren't there, and probably my keen problem with this. I mean, it could be hyperbole and so forth. How can this represent wisdom? Because there's one aspect of life that isn't mentioned here at all, and that's study and learning. And there's no time to study and learn with this woman who spends all her time working for the house and doing everything for everybody else and everything in the house. It's a lovely ideal, but it really denigrates the position of women because they're not supposed to learn. They're just supposed to do all the work and make the world good for men to be able to do what they want to do and what they need to do to increase their souls. That's my problem. That's one of my problems with it.
I hear that. Sometimes when I read Eshet Chayil, I'm thinking about a kollel wife. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but in the more right-wing traditional Orthodox world, they have, the best thing that the man can do is to study, and so he goes to a kollel and he studies all day. And the poor woman, she's so, not the poor woman, she doesn't see her, we see her that way, but she feels very proud that, oh, my husband studies, I do everything. I have the children, I raise the children, I take care of everything, I work, I do everything. All he does, I just want him to be able to study. Shtisel has that. One of the characters, it's Ruchami. All she wants is Hanina, the one who's I don't know if people are watching Shtisel or if you've watched Shtisel. She's one of the characters, and she just wants her husband to study. Just study, study, study. That's what's going to make me happy. So that when I read it, so I'm agreeing with what you're saying, Sandy. It's like she's supposed now if she's able to run the business and she does the real estate, she must have gotten her smarts from somewhere. So I don't know where she got her wisdom or her knowledge or her education from.
Exactly.
Excuse me, but she obviously got it from someplace. Yes, Barbara. People I see are ready to leap through the screen. I think it's great. I want everyone to leap through the screen.
I'm not going to leap through the screen because I actually am working in wool right now.
Okay.
But I did want to just say about the kollel wife, we don't want to throw Rabbi Akiva out with the bathwater because his wife sent him off for
24 years.
24 years, right? So otherwise we wouldn't have the great Rabbi Akiva. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I took a class with Michael Fishman, and who studies Eastern European, and of course not in King Solomon's time, but in modern times. And but he talked about in the shtetls that the women didn't get the Torah education, but they got the secular education. They could read, they could write. So they had to write the letters. They were the ones who could address the envelopes, but they also were the ones who could run the business. They knew the arithmetic, the math, they did the accounting, they ran the business. And to me, if that's the world that you're living in, I say they did a good job.
They did a good job. I mean, the women or educating?
The women, women. They did what they had to do.
Yeah, these kollel women are amazing. I mean, I would never want to be one. I certainly wouldn't want my daughters to be one. But these women, I mean, they literally can do it all. I mean, it's and he just sits just like this. The husband here, he sits at the gates, and everybody comes to him, and everybody lauds him, and everything he has is based on what she's done.
Sharon.
Yes, Michael.
Something to Bob Epstein. Bob, there is something from Nature's Way called HAS, H-A-S. You got to get it online. It'll help your allergies a lot.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Really having a tough time with that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Any more thoughts on Eshet Chayil or Proverbs? I hear what you're saying, Sandy, about it doesn't, our interpretation doesn't, we don't get it from the letter of the law, of the words. We're getting it sort of from in between. The idea that, the idea of the gratitude, it's my way of, it's our way of wanting to show appreciation. And there are more modern, I actually have two more modern versions. Let me do my screen share again of Eshet Chayil. Here's one. A good woman so hard to find. She's more precious than rubies. Her circle cast with friendship deep, full of love and graceful ease. She is a woman of valor. She opens her hands to the poor. She does not fear the other, extends her heart to those in need, encourages her friends to succeed. She is a woman of valor. Credit is hers for the fruit of her labors. Optimism is her might. Surrenders to God. She does not despair. Knows how to wrap you in her care. She is a woman of valor. Trust in her with your secret fears. Know that she'll hold you gently. When she speaks wisdom spread around her, depth of compassion so profound. She is a woman of valor. She counts herself vital in the world and revels in its wonders. In others, she sees the divine, holds holds on dearly to her lifeline. She is a woman of valor. Praise her, love her, hold her with your eyes. Be the safety that she needs to unlock all that she can be, and let her goodness rise. So that's a different kind of Eshet Chayil. I don't know if that resonates with anybody. Here's an interesting one. This is a verse by verse one by Kohenet Ahava Lilith Evershine. So right away, her name and her title should give you a clue as to where she is. Kohenet is a type of a modern type of ordination that is offered by women to women, based on traditional. I don't know a lot about it, but it's Kohenet is a priestess, like from Kohen. And so they see themselves as Jewish priestesses, as sort of like as the ancient priestesses. If we want, we can read this. I don't know if that's, but she goes verse by verse and gives it a modern take. If we have another, take a minute or two, is there interest in reading that? I see some heads shaking no, some shaking yes. It's long, but she talks about today's woman of valor. She and she alone determines her own worth. She trusts in herself and her fortune. She's found in the size of her heart and how she wishes to share it, whether or not she shares it with a partner, a spouse, or a lover. So this is like a modern, a modern take on Eshet Chayil. I'm happy to share it with with people. I can email it to you if you'd like. She knows that she needs to sustain her spiritual being as well as her physical being, her intellectual self as well as her emotional self. She seeks a balance between work, rest, and play, between the things she does and who she is. She dares to plant her own dreams and tend the garden of her soul. She's comfortable with and confident in her sexuality and finds strength in her womanhood. She seeks adventure in her life and can light her way down the path she chooses. So, anyway.
Could I just say that and the one you read before are totally different. Totally different, and to me, very much preferable.
Right. I hear that.
But because it's not talking about all the things she does, it's talking about the values that she embodies, which is something else entirely. And the idea of embodying these wonderful values, I think is really beautiful. And I think it's just as beautiful for a man as for a woman.
Yeah.
So would King Solomon, if he were alive today, would write something like this instead of what was written back then? What do you think? Yeah, you're right for what they were writing for the times that they were living in.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be King Solomon who would say it, maybe his mother.
I'm with you, Susan. A guy with 700 wives. I don't know. The word that comes to mind is womanizer, but
Whoever wrote it, yes.
whoever. But I don't know. That's one of the, I'm not so sure that I would feel comfortable saying this, not because I don't love the ideas in here. I do, and I certainly resonate with me much more. But the same way I like to say Kiddush, that was written centuries ago, millennia ago, the themes from the Kiddush of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt and the creation of the world. There's something that connects me with the ancient values of our heritage. So that's when I think of Eshet Chayil. I guess part of me wants to say it as Eshet Chayil because it's survived all these centuries. But I certainly agree that if you take it literal, it's not just problematic, it's just not true, is really what it is. It's just not true. It's not the way we live today. But I mean, so sometimes I've chosen to give it a different meaning, but other people can do other things with, and many people have chosen to just discard it. When I was younger, this sounds very Solomonic, but when I was younger, the idea of Eshet Chayil made me totally not interested, would not hear it, didn't want to know about it, would certainly have never said it at my Friday night table. Now I'm somewhat more mellowed, and the idea of connecting to it in a different way works for me. I'm not saying that it has to work for you. That's just a thing that works for me in our family. So but in the book of Proverbs, I mean, a lot of it, like I said, if you have a chance, if you have a Tanakh, read chapter 7 and chapters 8, because chapter 7 talks about the wantonness of a woman and how, how she comes to deceive you, and she comes to seduce. Now, she's a seductress. She comes to seduce him, and her husband is away doing all the work that she's not doing. She's a woman of with means, and her husband's out of town for a month, and she wants to grab this guy and live with him for a month, and promises him all kinds of physical delights for a month, and that's the woman as seductress. And then the next chapter talks about, well, this is what that she's going to take you down to your death for sure. And the next chapter talks about the woman as Lady Wisdom. She's calling it to the city. She's accessible. Her wisdom is accessible. The knowledge is accessible. And that's going to lead you down a totally different a different life path. So I would say read them both, and her central message, the last 4 verses of chapter 8 is, heed discipline and become wise, do not spurn it. Happy is the man who listens to me, meaning wisdom, coming early to my gates each day, waiting outside my doors. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord, but he who offends and destroys me, all who hate me love death. So I would, read those 2 chapters, and you just see where Solomon is going with how he views women and how he views wisdom. It's very interesting. So I wish all of you the wisdom to discern what works for you, because that's what wisdom literature is all about. It tells us what we're supposed to believe in, but again, because it's not black and white, that has its pluses and its minuses. The minuses are, it's not so obvious, but the pluses are, you can interpret things in a way that and make them work for you. So I hope that that's what you sort of take away from wisdom literature, that there's really a lot of wisdom there. And I remember when I had my first child, and I was in the hospital, and the nurse said to me, "You're going to get a lot of advice." She said, "Whatever feels like it works for you, take that advice, and whatever feels like it doesn't work for you, discard it." I thought that was the best advice I got as a new mother. And so sort of wisdom literature feels sort of similarly. There's a lot of it that speaks to you. Take it, embrace it, make it part of your life. And the part that doesn't, well, either grapple with it, engage with it, sort of with Eshet Chayil, or say, okay, this just doesn't work for me. That, I hope that I'm sure that you will find plenty that does work for you. So that's thank you for studying with us today. Next week we're doing the Book of Job. Totally different idea. So it should be very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
And in
Thank
case you don't have it to knock, you have a
Thank
phone.
you.
So put Safari on your phone. It's free.
Yes, right. If you don't have a
Oh,
Tanakh, or you can
Tanakh.
find anything you want, online. So next week, Book of Job, not such an easy book to deal with. Looking forward to studying that together next week. Okay, be well,
Okay.
everyone.
Well, bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good week.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.